In New York City, during the 1980s, the drug trade had turned into a nightmare. Dealers were making millions while street violence spiraled out of control. The NYPD found itself battling powerful drug gangs that had begun targeting the police themselves. I'm Victor Lang, former head of the FBI's New York office. Hundreds of FBI agents and police officers launched a bold plan to stop the violence and shut down the gang's deadly business. In New York City in the 1980s, the NYPD was fighting a losing battle against the drug lords. NYPD. Detective Sergeant Marcus Delgado worked narcotics in the borough of Queens. There were several major organizations selling cocaine and heroin in southeast Queens, and one of them was Lorenzo Fat Cat Navarro's organization. 26-year-old Queens native Lorenzo Fat Cat Navarro was a drug wholesaler. He distributed cocaine and heroin to mid-level dealers. His price for a kilo of coke was $50,000. He was worth millions. Navarro protected his operation by surrounding himself with a tight group of loyal associates, many of them family members. For police in Queens, cracking Navarro's operation would not be easy. His headquarters was at a deli at 107th Avenue and 150th Street in Jamaica, Queens. Surveillances were conducted there. Informants were spoken to, numerous buy-and-bust operations were carried out, sending undercover officers to purchase drugs. It was a continuing problem in the area, but a solid case could not yet be made against Fat Cat or any of the principals in his organization. That all changed one summer when a unit conducting a buy-and-bust operation developed information that led to a search warrant for Navarro's grocery store and the apartment above it. An informant told detectives that weapons, cash, and numerous drugs were stored there. Detective Sergeant Marcus Delgado and two detectives went into the grocery store. Delgado went behind the counter and walked toward the rear. He saw a light on in the back room and stepped inside. Three men were sitting behind a big desk, and he realized one of them was Fat Cat Navarro. Police ordered the men to put their hands up on the wall. Navarro reached down for something. Under a towel on the chair where he had been sitting, detectives found a loaded automatic and a revolver. "Those are mine, man." Police searched the room and found heroin, cocaine, and $30,000 in cash. Several ounces of marijuana lay on Navarro's desk. The raiding party that went to the second-floor apartment discovered $150,000 in cash in boxes, hundreds, perhaps thousands, of pieces of street cocaine wrapped in tinfoil, glassines of heroin, and additional weapons. Navarro was arrested on drugs and weapons charges. 24 hours later, he was free on $70,000 bail. At the time of his arrest, he was already on parole. He reported to his parole officer, Daniel Harper, and claimed he had only been in the grocery store to order a sandwich. Harper called Delgado to check the story. Delgado told him what had happened, that they had arrested Navarro in the grocery store with a number of weapons, but unfortunately he had made bail and was probably gone. Harper replied, "No, he's not. He says he's sitting outside my office here." Harper rearrested Navarro on the spot for violating his parole. For Navarro, that meant that even though he had made bail on the drug case, he was now in custody on the parole violation with no possibility of bail. He still owed 14 years to the state and was in serious trouble. A week later, Delgado and Harper testified at Navarro's parole hearing. Delgado briefly described what had happened that night, and the adjudicator immediately continued the violation of parole. Navarro was entitled to one more hearing and would then go back in for the remainder of those 14 years. But the drug dealer had no intention of letting that happen. 2 months after the hearing, parole officer Daniel Harper gave a co-worker a ride home from work. He drove through South Jamaica, a neighborhood in Queens. He knew the area was dangerous, but he had no idea he was being followed. Suddenly, a car pulled up beside him. Daniel Harper was shot once in the arm and once in the back. He died instantly. His killers disappeared into the night. Police arrived quickly, but could do nothing. They processed the scene and found little evidence. No shell casings were left behind. No one saw the shooting. News of the murder quickly reached Detective Sergeant Marcus Delgado. A sergeant who worked in his office called to tell him they had just killed a parole officer on Sutphin Boulevard, and it was Daniel Harper. He was a very fine guy and a good parole officer, a real good combination of social worker and police officer, the qualities necessary to do the job well. Police hit the streets to gather intelligence and find the killer. Harper's murder was the latest in a string of homicides in South Jamaica, as rival drug gangs battled each other for territory and control of the profits. The homicide rate in that part of the city where the drugs were being sold was skyrocketing. Shootings were commonplace. Citizens were terrified to come out of their houses. Law enforcement knew they had no choice but to go after these drug gangs. The NYPD stepped up its efforts in Operation Cleanup, a major long-term anti-drug operation. Hundreds of officers from precincts all over the city were brought in. The operation targeted drug dealers in the Jamaica-Queens area where Harper was murdered. Detectives also canvassed the neighborhood near Sutphin Boulevard where the shooting occurred, interviewing locals and hoping someone had seen something out of the ordinary. They learned that two men associated with Lorenzo Fat Cat Navarro had both been seen in the area: Derek Pappy Mason and Marcus Bellamy. Navarro had strong motivation for killing his parole officer. Investigators suspected he may have ordered Mason and Bellamy to carry out the hit. In the mid-1980s, parole officer Daniel Harper was shot to death on a street in South Jamaica, Queens. Police suspected that one of his parolees, Lorenzo Fat Cat Navarro, had ordered the hit. Detective Sergeant Marcus Delgado was astounded by what had happened to Daniel Harper. He could not believe they would have the audacity to kill a parole officer. Their thinking seemed to be that if they got Harper out of the way, Navarro would be able to return to the street. Where they got that idea, no one knew, but that was their thinking. As the detective who had arrested Navarro, Delgado knew he could be next on the hit list. He looked over his shoulder and was careful, but he never let it stop him from doing his job. To have someone actually say they were going to kill an officer to gain a benefit and perhaps get out of jail was very unusual. People in law enforcement and citizens in general found it deeply unnerving. Police knew that Derek Pappy Mason, a lieutenant in the Navarro organization, and Marcus Bellamy, a Mason associate, had been seen in the neighborhood the night Harper was murdered. An anonymous caller claimed Bellamy was outside the car when Harper was shot. The next day, another informant told detectives where to find Bellamy. The tip led investigators straight to him. Bellamy was picked up on the street in his neighborhood and brought in for questioning. He admitted he saw Harper just hours before the murder. He claimed he knew about the hit and had tried to warn him. That was why he was seen in the area that night. After hours of questioning, detectives learned he had done more than warn Harper. Bellamy revealed he was in the car with Harper the night he was killed. He said Derek Mason shot Harper. Bellamy had been in jail weeks before the murder. He claimed to have overheard Navarro telling another inmate that his parole officer was going to get what was coming to him. Authorities charged Bellamy with aiding and abetting the murder of Officer Harper. Next, detectives tracked down Derek Pappy Mason. In the suspect's booth, they found a fully loaded .22 Derringer. Mason was charged with murder and weapons possession. Investigators now had the conspirators behind bars, but they could not yet prove that Fat Cat Navarro had ordered Mason and Bellamy to kill his parole officer. While police tried to build a case against Navarro, who was still in jail, his organization continued to grow. In the late 1980s, the illegal drug crisis in New York went from bad to worse when crack cocaine exploded onto the scene. Special Agent Grant Whitaker worked drug cases in New York. In the preparation of crack, a relatively small amount of cocaine could be combined with other ingredients and stretched tremendously, turning something that might previously have sold for $100 into $1,000 for the drug trafficker. The drug sold cheap, as little as $2 a vial, and was highly addictive. For a working-class neighborhood like South Jamaica, crack cocaine was devastating. Because of the high level of addiction, users were repeatedly looking to get high and turned to crimes such as burglary and robbery. The general level of crime in these neighborhoods increased as a result. The NYPD stepped up its efforts and renamed the operation Operation Queens. A federal organized crime drug enforcement task force had been formed in New York City to go after the major drug dealers and distributors. Special Agent Marcus Alvarez was assigned to the task force. It was set up to utilize the FBI, New York City Police Department, Drug Enforcement Administration, and other agencies to coordinate a direct attack against these elements. The task force was divided into squads, each with its own mission. Their squad's mission was to target the cocaine, crack cocaine, and heroin dealers operating in the city. Dealing drugs in South Jamaica, Queens was a lucrative business. The high profits led to more competition and more violence. Nearly half the serious crimes in New York City were crack-related. One fall, a taxi dispatcher was murdered for testifying about a gun battle she had witnessed. A month later, a Guyanese immigrant complained to police that drug dealers had been selling crack on his street. The next evening, someone firebombed his home. NYPD officers from the 103rd Precinct in South Jamaica were assigned to protect the witness and his family. But the threats continued. Thomas Rivera, a member of Lorenzo Fat Cat Navarro's organization, approached the witness on the street. Rivera said he had 3 weeks to leave the neighborhood, or his entire family would die. In the late 1980s, drug dealers ruled South Jamaica, Queens. Citizens brave enough to stand up to the dealers were intimidated and murdered. The New York City Police Department and the Federal Task Force turned up the heat on all the drug organizations in Jamaica, Queens. They made over 2,000 arrests for the sale and possession of drugs in a 4-month period. In late January, one of Lorenzo Navarro's lieutenants, Thomas Rivera, was sent to Rikers Island for threatening the Guyanese witness. Around that time, Derek "Pappy" Mason, suspected of shooting parole officer Daniel Harper, was convicted on a weapons possession charge. The next day, Lorenzo Navarro was sentenced to 25 years to life on 11 counts of drugs and weapons possession. Detective Sergeant Marcus Delgado felt they had cut off the head of the snake and caught a couple of his top people with him. They had a strong case and had put that organization pretty much on the sidelines. The NYPD and the FBI were making headway in the battle to take back the streets of South Jamaica from the drug dealers. But the war was about to take a dark turn. Just days after Navarro and Mason were convicted, Officer Thomas Kane was guarding the Guyanese witness. Even with the man who had threatened his family in jail, the witness continued to receive threats. Kane was a rookie, just 22 years old. This was just another routine night. In the early morning hours, a car drove past Officer Kane's position. There were 4 men inside. The sedan drove around the block and out of sight. A short time later, 3 men snuck up behind Officer Kane's car. The witness heard the gunshots. Dispatch sent out the call of an officer down in Jamaica, Queens. Police arrived at the scene minutes later. Both front windows of Officer Kane's police cruiser had been shot out. The rookie cop was dead. Every police officer responded to that news and took it personally when a police officer was murdered. The witness told police he heard the shots and saw several men get into a tan-colored car and speed away. Investigators found an abandoned 1976 tan Olds Cutlass parked about 2 miles from where Kane was shot, but nothing inside linked it to the murder. Right after the murder of Officer Kane, the New York City Police Department started cracking down hard on all the drug dealers. A tremendous amount of heat was put on the drug dealers in Jamaica, Queens. They wanted the killers of Officer Kane. Hundreds of police officers working 12-hour shifts blanketed 3 precincts in southeastern Queens. They raided nearly 200 locations and questioned more than 300 suspected drug dealers. Investigators believed Lorenzo Navarro had ordered the murder of his parole officer from jail, and the man who had threatened the witness Officer Kane was protecting had ties to Navarro's organization. Navarro was a natural suspect. At the time of Officer Kane's murder, several members of the FBI task force were investigating a Queens drug dealer with ties to the Navarro organization. They simply shifted focus and moved full power onto the Navarro organization because they were gaining intelligence from the same informants who had been telling them about the other group. To get inside the organization, investigators used a variety of tools. They set up undercover drug buys and used telephone wiretaps. If Navarro was involved in the murder of Officer Kane, he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Now the resources of the FBI, the NYPD, and the DEA were focused on bringing down his operation. A rookie cop had been killed, shot to death on a street in New York City. 22-year-old Officer Thomas Kane gave his life protecting a witness from a deadly drug gang. A few days later, Officer Thomas Kane was laid to rest. 10,000 police officers attended the funeral. You can't kill a police officer and get away with it. Special Agent Marcus Alvarez noted that was why police reacted so quickly. New York City Mayor Victor Lang vowed to find those responsible. The city offered a $10,000 reward for information leading to the conviction of Kane's killers. The community was outraged. After years of being intimidated, they were fed up with the drug dealers. Special Agent Grant Whitaker observed that shootings would take place at any time of day. Many times innocent bystanders in the neighborhood would be caught in the crossfire. There were notorious cases in which children were killed as a result. Police set up a hotline to field tips. They answered 400 calls every 8 hours. Within days, the reward money climbed to $130,000. 3 days after the shooting, an anonymous caller said he knew who shot the cop. A detective convinced the caller to meet him. The tipster told police the shooter was Todd Mercer. Police were familiar with Mercer. He was a suspect in the murder of a prostitute. Detectives went looking for him. At the apartment of a relative, they found a witness willing to talk. He told detectives he knew the men who had carried out the shooting. He had been present when the hit was planned and knew who had ordered it. Around that time, only hours after his conviction on a gun charge, Derek "Pappy" Mason called one of his dealers, Philip Rivera, from a payphone at Rikers Island. The next day, Rivera met with fellow gang members Todd Mercer, David Whitaker, and Scott Rivera in an apartment 10 blocks from the murder scene. Rivera told them the boss was mad and had ordered them to hit a cop. Any cop. The price of the contract was $8,000. According to the informant, the men drew straws to choose the shooter. Todd Mercer would pull the trigger. The officer's fate was sealed. The next morning, Mercer came back to the apartment bragging about what they had done. They only collected a few $100s of the $8,000 they had been promised. That individual told how the murder actually went down. Who they chose. It was not Officer Kane chosen as an individual. They chose the police officer who was guarding the cooperating witness's house. He was a target of opportunity. Derek "Pappy" Mason wanted Kane's murder to send a chilling message to law enforcement. Your reputation is everything on the street if you're a drug trafficker. If it's known in your neighborhood that you are unwilling to take violent retribution for acts against you or your organization, you're not going to last very long as a drug trafficker. This was a killing that really galvanized law enforcement in New York City. The execution of a uniformed police officer who was targeted not because of any particular act or case, but because he was a police officer in and of itself. The NYPD finally had names linked to the shooting. They issued warrants for Philip Rivera, Todd Mercer, Scott Rivera, and David Whitaker. Philip Rivera was already in jail on another charge. Police went looking for the other 3 men. Later that same afternoon, Scott Rivera's mother called police. She wanted to arrange her son's surrender. He never showed up. Investigators believed Cobb would eventually contact his mother and installed a trap on her telephone line to catch the numbers of all incoming calls. The shooting continued to dominate the news, and police kept up the pressure on the street. It was not long before another important witness came forward. A young woman told detectives she had witnessed the shooting of Officer Kane. She was on the street when she heard a shot and saw men around the police car. She hid behind a car until the men left. She did not think they saw her. Investigators showed the witness photo lineups. She confirmed Todd Mercer as the man she saw at the passenger window of the patrol car. She also identified David Whitaker as the man standing by the driver's side window and Philip Rivera as the man she saw standing behind Whitaker. Police now had a witness to the shooting. They needed to find the 3 suspects still at large. The day after the trap on Scott Rivera's mother's phone was set up, police got a hit. An incoming call was traced to an address in Queens Village, one of several safe houses owned by Derek "Pappy" Mason. A few days later, less than a week after the Kane shooting, detectives spotted Scott Rivera. He was quickly taken into custody. Police searched the safe house. In the basement, they found Todd Mercer. At noon the next day, David Whitaker surrendered to police, accompanied by his mother. Of the 4 men accused of Kane's death, Whitaker was the only one who did not have a criminal record. Todd Mercer and David Whitaker gave conflicting statements. Each accused the other of actually pulling the trigger. All versions of the events placed Scott Rivera behind the wheel of the getaway car. Police and prosecutors were eventually able to piece together this version of events. In the early morning hours, Todd Mercer distracted Officer Kane by tapping on the window on the passenger side of the patrol car. David Whitaker shot Officer Kane 5 times through the driver's side window. Philip Rivera was just behind Whitaker. All 4 men were charged with second-degree murder. But for the agents and police, larger questions remained. Did Derek "Pappy" Mason act on his own? Was Fat Cat Navarro involved in the murder, and could they prove it? Police and FBI agents suspected one of 2 men was responsible for ordering the murder of a New York City police officer, drug wholesaler Lorenzo "Fat Cat" Navarro, or his former employee Derek "Pappy" Mason. Special Agent Grant Whitaker noted that the murder of police officer Kane was a state investigation conducted by the New York City Police Department. While they conducted their homicide investigation, the federal authorities and the local members of the federal task force conducted a parallel investigation targeting the Navarro organization as a whole. Investigators realized it was not enough to put the organization's leaders and their lieutenants in jail. To stop the violence, they had to destroy the gangs. Fat Cat Navarro's drug operation was huge. It brought in over $20 million a year. Through informant information, they had already established that the Navarro organization nerve center was the Big Mac Deli located in the Laurelton section of Queens. They immediately obtained subpoenas to examine the telephone toll records for that location. To investigate this large and dangerous organization, the FBI turned to wiretaps. Special Agent Marcus Alvarez was the assigned case agent. Only that type of investigation can collect information on major conspiracies. When an undercover officer deals with one person buying drugs, he has dealt with 1 or 2 people. To get an enterprise or an organization, you need the ability to wiretap. Agents wiretapped Navarro's headquarters, but immediately ran into a problem. The suspects in the Navarro organization were so paranoid about law enforcement attention in the neighborhood after the Kane shooting that they became convinced they were the target of a wiretap. They immediately shifted their operation to a new location. The agents targeted Navarro's family. A week after the shooting, the FBI began wiretapping Lorenzo Navarro's sister. They knew a lot of mid-level distributors were dealing with her. Her phone was ideal to get into. She was talking to Lorenzo Navarro and to about a dozen mid-level distributors she was bagging for. She was passing on instructions from the drug dealers to Lorenzo Navarro. She was in the middle of the whole organization, and she liked to talk. Every day, she was saying her phone was tapped and not to talk, but then she would turn around and talk anyway. At times, she would leave the phone off the hook, which was basically a bug into her house, and you could hear her having conversations with these guys when they picked up the drugs. Over the wiretap, the FBI intercepted a key call between Navarro and his sister. They were talking about Derek "Pappy" Mason. In one particular conversation, she discussed why Pappy Mason had done that thing, her reference to the actual murder of Officer Kane. Lorenzo responded that he did not know why he did it. Pappy Mason had a reputation of being a kind of violent guy, and Lorenzo near the end was kind of pushing him away, not really wanting to directly deal with him because he drew too much pressure from law enforcement. All indications prior to that conversation had suggested Lorenzo Navarro was involved. But through that conversation, later backed up with debriefings of cooperating witnesses, it became clear that Derek "Pappy" Mason had ordered the execution of police officer Kane. Pappy Mason thought the police department had disrespected him, so he ordered his people to go out and kill any police officer. Navarro was not involved in the murder of Officer Kane, but his operation still continued to grow and to supply very dangerous street gangs with product. From listening on the telephone, they established that Lorenzo "Fat Cat" Navarro was communicating with core members of the conspiracy. Every week or two, a group of individuals would go up and have meetings with him and receive orders from him in person as to how the operation was to be managed. Agents placed a microphone in the visiting room at Rikers Island to try to listen in on Lorenzo Navarro's meetings with his lieutenants, but the sound quality was too poor. Agents and police continued to build the case. They learned the methods of distribution, the methods of drug preparation, identified some of their sources of supply, who was communicating with whom, how it was done, the level of their trafficking, some of their customers, and it established a hierarchy of the organization. They continued to conduct surveillances based on the information from the wiretap, but surveillance was difficult. Most successful drug dealers are savvy and know how law enforcement gathers information. The drug traffickers employed counter-surveillance techniques. They actually paid people on the street for a radius of several blocks to maintain a lookout for police authorities in the area. When agents got enough information from the wiretap, they made arrests. If they intercepted a call about a drug transaction or the transport of drugs from one location to another, they could move in and take the load. After 5 long months, agents met with the prosecutor. It was time to put charges on some subjects, to get some cooperators, and to execute the search warrants to get the guns and drugs that would confirm the conversations. Special Agent Marcus Alvarez felt they had enough probable cause to issue arrest and search warrants. You have to know when it's time to bring the case down. And that's when they brought this case down in August. The prosecutor agreed. It was time to take down the Navarro organization. After 5 months of investigation, Special Agent Marcus Alvarez planned a complex and potentially dangerous arrest operation. The goal was to completely dismantle the Navarro drug organization. The jury needs to hear 3 things to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt: the testimony of somebody inside, a cooperator, tapes of the participants in the organization in their day-to-day activities, and physical evidence. The arrest operation would hit over 20 locations. Agents believed the search warrants would give them the physical evidence: guns, drugs, and money. They also had arrest warrants for 38 members of Navarro's organization. They hoped a few of these people would turn and become cooperators. When a jury looks at a cooperator, the conversations that have been intercepted, and physical evidence, and they all say the same thing, there's only one verdict that a jury can come back with, and that's guilt. Agents prepared affidavits and coordinated the 400 bodies needed to execute the operation. Everyone involved understood the risks. There's always danger when you're executing arrest warrants and search warrants. You never know how a person is going to react. That's why you go well-armed and well-equipped and with enough people to control the scenario and minimize the potential for violence. On August 11th, the affidavits had been written, the arrest and search warrants had been issued, and the arrest teams were prepared. Everything was in place. Everybody knows what they're going to do, knows who they're going to pick up, knows where they have to go. And it's just time to execute. Several of the targeted locations were very dangerous. They deployed 3 SWAT teams in 3 locations where they thought there might be a potential violent reaction. The teams hit locations where drugs were being stored and sold. Fortunately, they never tipped their hand in this investigation, so none of the defendants knew they were coming. Navarro's sister was surprised by the arrest team. She reacted with anger. This was a unique investigation in that mothers of the main subjects were involved. Lorenzo Navarro's mother was involved. Derek Pappy Mason's mother was involved. They arrested Mason's mother with kilos of crack cocaine and a handgun in their residence. All over the Jamaica section of Queens, one by one, members of the Navarro organization were arrested and evidence was collected. During the execution of search warrants, they found guns, a substantial amount of packaging material, a substantial amount of crack cocaine, and numerous individuals with cash money. They seized all those items. Lorenzo Fat Cat Navarro and Derek Pappy Mason were both arrested in prison on drug charges that would keep them behind bars forever. By the end of the day, 30 people were arrested, 5 pieces of property were seized. Navarro's sister and other key players in the organization decided to become cooperators. The multi-million-dollar violent drug operation was effectively destroyed. For Lorenzo Navarro, it was the murder of Officer Thomas Kane, a murder he had nothing to do with, that finally brought down his drug empire. This case dismantled the Lorenzo Navarro organization. Lorenzo was convicted and went to trial. Every member of this organization that was charged was convicted and went to prison. Several years later, Lorenzo Navarro also pleaded guilty to ordering the murder of parole officer Daniel Harper. Later that same year, there was a surprising development in the Harper murder case. Randolph Lucas was arrested on an unrelated charge and confessed his involvement in the crime. He claimed his brother Eric drove the car and that he shot and killed Daniel Harper. They were hired by a Navarro associate to hurt Harper, but they panicked and fatally shot the parole officer. No one knows why Marcus Bellamy claimed to have been at the scene that night and why he said he witnessed Derek Mason shoot Daniel Harper. The NYPD anti-drug operation and the federal task force targeting Queens drug dealers had a decided effect on drug-related crime in New York City. Special Agent Grant Whitaker noted that the task force cases in New York sent the message to the streets that crime doesn't pay. That if you're going to be involved in violent drug trafficking in New York City, you're ultimately going to face justice in a federal court. He believed that message resonated on the streets because the violent crime rate in New York City and many other major U.S. cities dropped significantly in the 1990s, and it was his belief that it dropped because of all these successful prosecutions. Daniel Harper's name was placed on the memorial for parole officers killed in the line of duty. A foundation was created in Officer Thomas Kane's name. Their legacy is the destruction of a deadly organization that threatened the neighborhoods they had sworn to protect.